The dust swirled like tiny devils across the parched street as Clara Richardson stared at the letter in her trembling hands, her future crumbling as quickly as the brittle paper between her fingers. Montana Territory, 1875, a place and time that forgave few mistakes, especially for a woman alone. The stagecoach that had delivered her to Dillon 2 weeks ago might as well have dropped her at the edge of the world. "Miss Richardson," a voice called from behind the bar, pulling Clara from her thoughts. "Your break ended 10 minutes ago." Clara tucked the letter into her apron pocket and straightened her shoulders. "Coming, Mr. Sullivan." She smoothed down her simple blue dress, a far cry from the tailored gowns she'd left behind in Boston. At 22, she had never imagined working as a saloon girl serving drinks. Not her virtue, but life had a way of dismantling expectations. Sullivan's Saloon sat at the heart of Dillon, Montana, a growing town nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. The rough-hewn timber building was a sanctuary of sorts for the miners, cowboys, and drifters who populated the region. For Clara, it represented survival after her father's death had left her penniless, and her fiancé had promptly withdrawn his proposal. The evening rush was beginning, and Clara moved efficiently between tables, delivering whiskey and beer to thirsty patrons. Her refined accent and educated manner set her apart from the other saloon girls, who had taken to calling her professor behind her back. "Another round for the boys," called out Bart Sullivan, the proprietor, a burly man with a surprisingly gentle demeanor toward his female employees. He protected them fiercely from overzealous customers, making Sullivan's one of the more respectable establishments in town. As Clara gathered empty glasses onto her tray, the batwing doors swung open. A hush fell over the usually raucous crowd as a tall figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the dying sunlight. "Well, look what the wind blew in," muttered Sullivan, reaching beneath the counter where Clara knew he kept a loaded shotgun. The newcomer moved with a languid confidence that commanded attention. His spurs clinked softly with each step, a rhythmic counterpoint to the suddenly hushed conversations. As he approached the bar, Clara got her first clear look at him and nearly dropped her tray. He wasn't like the other cowboys who frequented the saloon. There was something in his bearing that spoke of danger and hard-won wisdom. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with a strong jaw shadowed by dark stubble. A thin scar traced a path from his left temple to his cheekbone. But it was his eyes that held her piercing blue beneath the brim of his dust-covered hat. "Whiskey," he said simply, placing a coin on the bar. Sullivan nodded curtly and poured the drink. Passing through Kendrick Adamson. The name rippled through the saloon in whispers. Clara had heard it before. A gunslinger, some said. A bounty hunter, according to others. A man both respected and feared throughout the territory. "For now," Kendrick replied, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Clara. She felt an unexpected heat rise to her cheeks and quickly looked away, busying herself with collecting empty glasses. "Miss," he called softly, and Clara reluctantly approached. Up close, she could see that his eyes weren't simply blue, they were the deep, clear blue of high mountain lakes. "Yes, sir," she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "I believe you've been staring at my table for the past 5 minutes. Either I've grown extra heads or you want something." Clara blinked in surprise. "I was merely waiting to see if you required service." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Is that what they call it in Boston?" Her eyes widened. "How did your accent," he said. "It's fading, but it's there." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "You look tired. Sit for a moment." Clara glanced toward Sullivan, who was watching them with a furrowed brow. "I can't. I'm working." Sullivan, Kendrick called, not taking his eyes from Clara's face. Give your girl a break. 5 minutes. To Clara's surprise, Sullivan nodded. 5 minutes, Clara, then back to work. Hesitantly, she sat down, placing her tray on the table. Thank you, Mr. Adamson. Kendrick, he corrected. And you are Clara Richardson. He studied her with those unsettling blue eyes. What brings a Boston lady to Dillon, Montana? Clara stiffened. That's rather personal, sir. Kendrick, he reminded her. And yes, it is. But we're sitting here having a drink together, so I thought I'd ask. We are not having a drink together, Clara pointed out. You are having a drink. I am taking a brief respite from my duties. That ghost of a smile appeared again. Then allow me to remedy that. He signaled to Sullivan, who brought over another glass and poured a small measure of whiskey for Clara. She hesitated, then took a sip, wincing as the liquor burned down her throat. My father died, she said suddenly, surprising herself with the admission. He left nothing but debts. I had a teaching position lined up in Helena, but when I arrived, I discovered the school had hired someone else. I ended up here. Kendrick nodded, no pity in his expression, just understanding. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. Indeed it does, Clara agreed, finding something oddly comforting in his matter-of-fact response. And what about you, Mr. Adamson? What brings you to Dillon? Work, he said simply. And what kind of work do you do? He took a slow sip of his whiskey. I find people who don't want to be found. A bounty hunter, then. Clara felt a flutter of unease. That sounds dangerous. It can be, he admitted, but it pays well and I'm good at it. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the door. A group of cowboys had entered, already deep in their cups and looking for more entertainment. Clara recognized them as ranch hands from the Circle T, a nearby cattle operation owned by Thomas Tucker, one of the most powerful men in the valley. I should get back to work, Clara said, rising from her seat. Kendrick's hand shot out, grasping her wrist. His touch was gentle but firm. Be careful with that lot. They're trouble. Clara pulled her hand away, ignoring the lingering warmth of his fingers against her skin. I can handle myself, Mr. Adamson. Kendrick, he said again, his eyes serious. And I don't doubt you can, but even so, watch yourself. Clara nodded and returned to her duties, aware of his gaze following her. The next hour passed in a blur of orders and rowdy laughter. The Circle T cowboys grew increasingly boisterous, their demands more insistent. One of them, a red-faced man with a drooping mustache, grabbed Clara's arm as she passed. Come sit with us, pretty lady, he slurred, pulling her closer. Please release me, sir, Clara said firmly, trying to maintain her composure. Don't be like that, the cowboy persisted, his grip tightening. Just a little company is all we're asking. Clara was about to call for Sullivan when a shadow fell across them. Kendrick stood beside the table, his expression neutral but his eyes cold as ice. The lady asked you to let her go, he said quietly. The cowboy looked up, momentarily confused, then belligerent. This ain't your business, Adamson. I'm making it my business, Kendrick replied, his voice still calm. Let her go. For a tense moment, Clara thought the cowboy might refuse, but then he released her arm with a muttered curse. Kendrick stepped back, allowing Clara to move away but remained standing until she was safely behind the bar. You all right? Sullivan asked, eyeing the cowboys warily. Clara nodded, rubbing her arm where she could still feel the cowboy's grip. Yes, thank you. She glanced toward Kendrick, who had returned to his table but kept his attention on the cowboys. Does he do that often? Intervene in other people's affairs? Sullivan shrugged. Adamson's got his own code, doesn't tolerate disrespect toward women, that's for sure. He lowered his voice. Be careful around him, though. He's not the kind of man who stays in one place for long. Clara bristled slightly. I have no intentions toward Mr. Adamson, I assure you. Sullivan's weathered face broke into a knowing smile. Didn't say you did. But I've seen the way he looks at you, and I've seen the way you look back. Before Clara could formulate a response, the batwing doors burst open once again. This time, a tall, imposing figure entered Thomas Tucker himself, flanked by two of his men. The saloon fell silent as Tucker surveyed the room, his gaze eventually settling on Kendrick. "Adamson," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I thought I made it clear the last time that you weren't welcome in my town." Kendrick took another sip of his whiskey. "Wasn't aware you owned Dillon, Tucker." "I own enough of it," Tucker replied, moving to stand in front of Kendrick's table, "including the debt on this fine establishment." He glanced at Sullivan, who looked away uncomfortably. Clara watched the exchange with growing tension. Tucker was a feared man in the territory, with money and men enough to enforce his will. Most people knew better than to cross him. "Well, I'm just passing through," Kendrick said, unperturbed. "I'll be out of your hair by tomorrow." Tucker studied him for a moment, then nodded. "See that you are." He turned to leave but paused when he spotted Clara. "And who might this be?" he asked, approaching the bar. "Clara Richardson," Sullivan supplied quickly. "New girl, just started 2 weeks ago." Tucker removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair slicked back from a high forehead. He was in his 50s, Clara guessed, with cold eyes that assessed her as one might appraise livestock. "Miss Richardson," he said, offering a thin smile. "A pleasure. You're not like Sullivan's usual hires." "Thank you, I think," Clara replied cautiously. "I'm hosting a gathering at my ranch this Saturday," Tucker continued. "I'd be honored if you'd attend, as a special guest." Clara felt all eyes in the saloon on her. To refuse Tucker outright would be unwise, but she had heard enough about his gatherings to know she wanted no part of them. "That's very kind, Mr. Tucker," she said carefully, "but I'm afraid I'm committed to working here on Saturday evening." Tucker's smile didn't waver, though it failed to reach his eyes. "Sullivan can surely spare you for one night, can't you, Bart?" Sullivan hesitated, clearly torn between protecting his employee and appeasing the man who, as Tucker had pointedly reminded everyone, held considerable sway over his business. "Actually," Kendrick's voice cut through the tension, "Miss Richardson has already agreed to accompany me to the social at the church on Saturday evening." Clara's head whipped around to stare at him in astonishment. No such invitation had been extended, and no such plans existed. Tucker's expression hardened. "Is that so?" He looked back at Clara. "Well, Miss Richardson, is what Adamson says true?" Caught between two dangerous men, Clara made her choice. "Yes," she said firmly. "Mr. Adamson asked me earlier this evening, and I accepted." Tucker studied her face for a long moment, then placed his hat back on his head. "Another time, perhaps." He tipped his hat to her and turned to leave, his men falling in step behind him. At the door, he paused to look back at Kendrick. "Remember what I said, Adamson. Be gone by tomorrow." After they left, the saloon erupted into conversation again, the tension slowly dissipating. Clara marched over to Kendrick's table. "What was that?" she demanded in a hushed voice. Kendrick regarded her calmly. "That was me saving you from an uncomfortable situation, by creating another one." Clara hissed. "Now I'm supposedly attending a church social with you, a man I barely know, this Saturday. Would you rather go to Tucker's gathering?" he asked. "Trust me, you wouldn't enjoy his hospitality." Clara sighed, acknowledging the truth in his words. "So what happens now?" "Tucker will certainly notice if I'm not at this social." "Simple," Kendrick said, finishing his whiskey. "We go to the social." Clara stared at him incredulously. "But you told Tucker you'd be gone by tomorrow." A slow smile spread across Kendrick's face, transforming his features and causing Clara's heart to skip a beat despite herself. "I lied." For the next few days, Clara saw no sign of Kendrick Adamson. She told herself it was for the best. The man was clearly trouble, and she had enough complications in her life without adding a notorious bounty hunter to the mix. Still, she found herself watching the Batwing doors each time they swung open, feeling an inexplicable disappointment when it wasn't him. By Saturday, she had convinced herself that he had indeed left town as promised, and that she would have to invent some excuse for not attending Tucker's gathering. She was clearing tables after the midday rush when Sullivan approached her. "Got a message for you," he said, handing her a folded piece of paper. "Boy delivered it about an hour ago." Clara opened the note with curious fingers. "Church social, 7 o'clock. I'll meet you there, Kay." Her pulse quickened. He was still in town, and apparently intended to keep their fabricated engagement. Clara spent the remainder of the afternoon in a state of nervous anticipation. She had brought few personal belongings with her from Boston, but among them was one good dress, a deep green silk with modest lace trim that had been her mother's. She had kept it carefully wrapped in tissue paper, a reminder of a different life and a different future than the one she now faced. At 6:30, Clara left her small room above the saloon, the green dress making her feel both conspicuous and confident as she walked the short distance to the small white church on the edge of town. The social was already underway, with lanterns strung across the churchyard casting a warm glow over the gathering. Tables laden with food lined one side, while a small group of musicians played lively tunes for the couples dancing in the cleared space before the church steps. Clara hesitated at the edge of the gathering, suddenly unsure. She had attended no social function since arriving in Dillon, and knew few people outside of the saloon patrons. She was considering retreating when a warm hand settled at the small of her back. "You look beautiful," Kendrick's voice murmured near her ear. Clara turned, her retort dying on her lips as she took in the sight of him. Gone was the dust-covered cowboy from the saloon. In his place stood a remarkably handsome man in clean black trousers and a crisp white shirt, his dark hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. Only the thin scar on his cheek remained as a reminder of the dangerous man she had met days ago. "You clean up well, Mr. Adamson," she managed to say. "Kendrick," he corrected with a smile, offering his arm. "Shall we?" As they entered the churchyard, Clara was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Clearly, Kendrick was known to the townspeople, and his presence with Sullivan's new saloon girl was cause for speculation. "People are staring," she whispered. "Let them," he replied unconcernedly, guiding her toward the refreshment table. "Would you like some punch?" As the evening progressed, Clara found herself relaxing in Kendrick's company. He introduced her to several townspeople, including the preacher and his wife, who greeted her warmly despite knowing where she worked. They danced twice, Kendrick proving to be surprisingly graceful for a man of his size and profession. "Where did a bounty hunter learn to dance like this?" Clara asked as he guided her expertly through a waltz. "My mother was insistent that her sons learn proper social graces," he replied. "Said it didn't matter if we lived on the frontier, no son of hers would grow up a complete savage. She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Kendrick said, a shadow passing over his features. "She died when I was 15. Fever took her and my youngest brother in the same week." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "My mother died when I was 12. It changes you, doesn't it? Losing a parent so young." Kendrick nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a new understanding. "It does. Makes you grow up fast." They were interrupted by a commotion near the church entrance. Thomas Tucker had arrived, accompanied by several of his men, including the red-faced cowboy who had grabbed Clara in the saloon. Tucker's gaze swept the gathering until it landed on Clara and Kendrick, his expression darkening. "Trouble," Kendrick murmured, subtly maneuvering them toward the edge of the dancing area. Tucker made his way through the crowd, people parting before him like water around a stone. "Adamson," he said coldly when he reached them. "I thought I told you to leave town." "You suggested it," Kendrick replied evenly. "I decided against it." Tucker's jaw tightened. "This is my territory. I don't want you in it." Last I checked, Montana territory belonged to the United States government, not Thomas Tucker. The tension between the two men was palpable. Clara could sense the gathering crowd watching with bated breath, the music having died away to an awkward silence. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" The preacher stepped forward, his gentle voice somehow diffusing some of the hostility. Tucker forced a smile. "No problem, Reverend. Just a friendly discussion between acquaintances." He turned back to Kendrick. "We'll continue this conversation another time." As Tucker moved away, Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "What was that about?" she asked Kendrick. "There's clearly bad blood between you two." Kendrick's expression was grim. "I'm here on business, Clara. Tucker's son, James, robbed a bank in Helena 3 months ago. 2 people died. I've been hired to bring him in." Clara's eyes widened. "You're here to arrest Thomas Tucker's son, if I can find him. Tucker's hidden him somewhere." "That's why he wants me gone," understanding dawned. "And that's why you stayed despite his warning. You're still looking for James." Kendrick nodded. "I never leave a job unfinished." The implications of what he was saying sank in. "That's incredibly dangerous. Tucker practically owns this town." "It's what I do," he said simply. The social continued, but the easy atmosphere of earlier had evaporated. Clara found herself watching Tucker and his men from the corner of her eye, noting their hostile glances toward Kendrick. "Perhaps we should leave," she suggested after a while. "I don't like the way they're watching you." Kendrick smiled slightly. "Worried about me, Miss Richardson?" "Don't be absurd," she replied, though the flush in her cheeks betrayed her. "I simply don't want to be caught in the middle of whatever feud you have with Tucker." "Fair enough," Kendrick conceded. "I'll walk you back to the saloon." They slipped away from the social, the night air cool against Clara's heated skin. The main street was quiet, most of the town's inhabitants either at home or at the church event. "Thank you for this evening," Clara said as they walked. "Despite the interruption, I enjoyed myself." "So did I," Kendrick admitted. "More than I expected to." They reached the saloon, dark and silent for the night. Clara paused at the side entrance that led to the stairs up to her room. "Will you really leave once you find James Tucker?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. Kendrick studied her face in the moonlight. "That's been my pattern. Find my quarry, collect my reward, move on to the next job." "It sounds like a lonely life." "It can be," he acknowledged. "But it suits me, or at least it has until now." Something in his tone made Clara's heart beat faster. And now, instead of answering, Kendrick stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I should go," he said softly, even as he leaned in. Clara knew she should step back, should bid him good night and retreat to the safety of her room. Instead, she found herself rising on her toes to meet him halfway, her eyes fluttering closed as his lips brushed against hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and over far too quickly. Kendrick pulled back, his eyes searching hers. "Good night, Clara Richardson," he said, his voice husky. "Good night, Kendrick Adamson," she replied, breathless. He waited until she was safely inside before disappearing into the darkness. Clara climbed the stairs to her room, her fingers touching her lips where she could still feel the pressure of his kiss. She knew she was treading dangerous ground. Kendrick was exactly the kind of man she should avoid, rootless, dangerous, with enemies like Thomas Tucker. And yet, she couldn't deny the connection she felt to him, a connection unlike anything she'd experienced before. She fell asleep thinking of blue eyes and the gentle touch of calloused hands. The next morning dawned hot and dry, the Montana summer in full force. Clara rose early, her duties at the saloon not beginning until noon. She decided to visit the general store to purchase some necessities thread to mend a tear in her work dress, a new hairbrush to replace the one she'd lost during her journey west, and if she could afford it, perhaps some paper and a pen to write to her aunt in Philadelphia. The main street was already busy despite the early hour, ranchers and townspeople going about their business before the worst heat of the day set in. Clara nodded politely to those she recognized, aware of the curious glances that followed her. No doubt word of her attendance at the church social with Kendrick Adamson had spread through town like wildfire. Inside the general store, she was examining spools of thread when the bell above the door jingled. Looking up, she saw Thomas Tucker enter, accompanied by the red-faced cowboy from the saloon. Tucker spotted her immediately, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Miss Richardson," he said, approaching her. "What a pleasant surprise." Clara inclined her head politely. "Mr. Tucker." "I hope you enjoyed the social last night," Tucker continued, his tone conversational but his eyes hard. "Though I must say, I was disappointed you declined my invitation in favor of Adamson's company." "The social was lovely," Clara replied carefully. "Reverend Williams and his wife were very welcoming." Tucker moved closer, forcing Clara to take a step back against the shelves. "You should be more careful about the company you keep, Miss Richardson. Adamson is a dangerous man, not the kind of friend a respectable young woman should have." Clara lifted her chin. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Tucker, but I'm quite capable of choosing my own acquaintances." Tucker's facade of politeness slipped, revealing the anger beneath. "Let me be clear, miss. Adamson is here to cause trouble for my family. Anyone who associates with him is no friend of mine, and in this town you don't want me as an enemy." "Is that a threat, Mr. Tucker?" Clara asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Consider it friendly advice," he replied, stepping back. "Good day, Miss Richardson." After Tucker left, Clara completed her purchases quickly, her hands trembling slightly as she counted out her meager coins. The storekeeper's wife gave her a sympathetic look, but said nothing. As she exited the store, Clara nearly collided with Kendrick, who was just about to enter. "Clara," he said, his expression brightening before he noted her distress. "What's wrong?" She glanced around nervously. "Not here. Tucker was just in the store. He made his feelings about our association quite clear." Kendrick's jaw tightened. "Did he threaten you?" "Not explicitly, but the message was unmistakable." He took her arm gently. "Come with me." Kendrick led her to the small hotel at the end of the street, guiding her through the lobby to a private dining room at the back. A few early diners glanced up as they passed, but soon returned to their meals. "I have a room here," Kendrick explained, pulling out a chair for her at a small corner table. "Thought it safer than staying at the saloon, given my business with Tucker." A waitress appeared and Kendrick ordered coffee for both of them. When they were alone again, he leaned forward. "Tell me exactly what Tucker said." Clara recounted the conversation, watching as Kendrick's expression grew increasingly grim. "This is my fault," he said when she finished. "I've put you in danger." "No," Clara insisted. "I made my own choice when I went to that social with you." "A choice based on a lie I told to keep you from Tucker's clutches," Kendrick pointed out. "Now he's targeting you to get to me." The waitress returned with their coffee and they fell silent until she left again. "I think I should leave Dillon," Clara said finally. "There's nothing holding me here. I can try to find work in another town." Kendrick shook his head. "Tucker's influence extends throughout the valley." and running now would only convince him that intimidation works. He took a sip of his coffee. No, the best way to handle this is for me to finish my business quickly. Once I've apprehended James, Tucker will have bigger concerns than a saloon girl who snubbed him. And if you can't find James, I'll find him, Kendrick said with quiet confidence. I always do. Clara studied him across the table. Why do you do this work? Surely there are safer ways to make a living. Kendrick was silent for a moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. My father was a lawman, he said finally. Sheriff in a small Nebraska town. He was killed trying to arrest a cattle rustler when I was 18. The man who did it was never brought to justice. His blue eyes met hers. I decided then that I'd make sure others like him didn't escape punishment. So it's about justice for you, Clara said softly. Not just the bounty. The money allows me to be selective about the jobs I take, he acknowledged. But yes, ultimately it's about making sure there are consequences for those who think they are above the law. Like James Tucker. Kendrick nodded. His father's wealth and influence have protected him for too long. The families of those killed in that robbery deserve justice. Clara found herself admiring his principles, even as she worried about the danger they placed him in. What can I do to help? Surprise flickered across Kendrick's features. You want to help me? If it means resolving this situation and removing Tucker's threat, yes. A slow smile spread across his face. You continue to surprise me, Clara Richardson. Is that a good thing? A very good thing, he assured her. But I don't want to involve you further. It's too risky. Clara straightened her shoulders. I'm already involved, Mr. Adamson, and I'm not as fragile as I might appear. Kendrick studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, there might be a way you can help. The saloon is a hub for information. People talk freely when they're drinking, especially Tucker's men. If you keep your ears open, you might hear something useful about James's whereabouts. I can do that, Clara agreed. But won't Tucker's men be suspicious of me now? Act normally, Kendrick advised. Serve them, be polite but not overly friendly. If they mention me, express disinterest or disappointment. Let them think our connection was fleeting and that Tucker's warning worked. They spent the next hour discussing strategies and sharing what little information Kendrick had already gathered about James Tucker's possible hiding places. By the time they parted ways, Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose and an increasing awareness of how deeply Kendrick Adamson was affecting her. For the next several days, Clara followed Kendrick's advice, maintaining a careful distance from him in public while secretly meeting to exchange information. Tucker's men returned to the saloon, watching her closely at first but gradually relaxing when she showed no sign of continuing her association with the bounty hunter. Late one evening, as the saloon was beginning to empty, Clara overheard a conversation between two of Tucker's ranch hands. Boss wants extra men at the line cabin tomorrow, one muttered. Says it's important. That old place up by Rattlesnake Creek, the other asked. What for? Ain't nothing up there but dust and rattlers. Don't ask questions if you want to keep your job, the first cowboy warned. Just be there at noon. When they left, Clara made her way to the hotel as soon as her shift ended, slipping through the back entrance as she'd done before. Kendrick was waiting in his room, maps and wanted posters spread across the small desk. The line cabin at Rattlesnake Creek, Clara said without preamble. Tucker's sending men there tomorrow at noon. It could be important. Kendrick looked up sharply. You're sure? Clara nodded, repeating the conversation she'd overheard. This could be it, Kendrick said, excitement evident in his voice as he located the creek on his map. It's remote, hard to find unless you know the area. Perfect hiding place. What will you do? Get there before Tucker's men arrive, Kendrick said, already gathering his gear. If James is there, I'll take him into custody and be on the trail to Helena before Tucker knows what happened. Clara felt a sudden pang at the thought of him leaving so soon. And if it's a trap? Kendrick paused in his preparations, his expression softening as he looked at her. I'll be careful, he promised, moving to stand before her. Clara, when this is over, she pressed a finger to his lips. When this is over, we'll talk, she said. Not before. I don't want promises made in the heat of the moment. Kendrick caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Fair enough. But know this meeting you has changed things for me, changed me. Clara felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Be safe, Kendrick Adamson. That's all I ask. He pulled her into his arms, his kiss deeper and more urgent than their first. Clara responded in kind, pouring all her unspoken feelings into the embrace. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily. I'll come find you when it's done, Kendrick promised, reluctantly releasing her. Clara nodded and slipped from the room, her heart both lighter and heavier than it had been in years. The next day passed with excruciating slowness. Clara went through her duties mechanically, her thoughts constantly straying to Kendrick and his dangerous mission. By evening, there was still no word from him, and Clara found herself growing increasingly anxious. Just before the saloon's busiest hour, a commotion erupted outside. Gunshots echoed down the main street, followed by shouts and the pounding of hooves. Clara rushed to the window along with the other patrons, peering out into the gathering dusk. A group of riders thundered into town, Tucker at their head. Behind them, 2 horses dragged a travois bearing what appeared to be a wounded man. With a jolt of fear, Clara recognized Kendrick's dust-covered form. Sullivan, Tucker bellowed, dismounting before the saloon. Get out here! Bart Sullivan emerged from the saloon, shotgun in hand. What's the meaning of this, Tucker? Found this snake trespassing on my property, Tucker snarled, gesturing to Kendrick, who was struggling to rise from the travois despite his obvious injuries. Thought the town should see what happens to those who cross me. 2 of Tucker's men hauled Kendrick to his feet. Even from a distance, Clara could see the blood staining his shirt and the bruises marring his face. He had been badly beaten but was conscious, his eyes scanning the growing crowd until they found Clara standing in the saloon doorway. This man is a bounty hunter, Tucker announced loudly. Came here under false pretenses, trying to abduct my son for a crime he didn't commit. That's a lie, Kendrick called out, his voice hoarse but strong. James Tucker robbed the First National Bank of Helena and killed 2 innocent people. I have a legal warrant for his arrest. Tucker backhanded him across the face. You have nothing but lies, and now you'll answer for them. Clara watched in horror as Tucker drew his pistol, aiming it at Kendrick's head. Without thinking, she pushed through the crowd. Stop, she cried, planting herself between Kendrick and the gun. Tucker's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed dangerously. Step aside, Miss Richardson. This isn't your concern. It is my concern, Clara insisted, her heart hammering in her chest but her voice steady. You can't just execute a man in the street without a trial. That's murder, Mr. Tucker, no matter how you dress it up. A murmur ran through the gathered townspeople. Tucker glanced around, noting the uneasy expressions on many faces. The girl's right, Tucker, called Sheriff Mills, pushing through the crowd. The elderly lawman was widely considered to be in Tucker's pocket, but even he seemed disturbed by the public execution about to take place. If Adamson's broken the law, he needs to stand trial. Tucker's jaw worked as he considered his options. Finally, he lowered his gun. Fine. Lock him up, Sheriff. But I want guards on him day and night. He doesn't leave that jail alive, understand? Sheriff Mills nodded, motioning for his deputy to take custody of Kendrick. As they led him away, Kendrick's eyes met Clara's, conveying a silent message of gratitude and warning. The crowd dispersed slowly, Tucker and his men heading toward the hotel where they would undoubtedly continue drinking and plotting. Clara returned to the saloon, her mind racing. Kendrick was alive but injured and in serious danger. Tucker had no intention of allowing a fair trial to take place. "That was a brave thing you did," Sullivan said quietly when they were alone behind the bar. "Foolish, but brave." "What would you have had me do?" Clara asked. "Stand by and watch him murdered in the street?" Sullivan shook his head. "No, but you've made yourself a target now. Tucker won't forget that you defied him publicly." Clara knew he was right. There would be consequences for her actions, but she couldn't bring herself to regret them. "What happens now?" "Tucker will wait until things quiet down, then find a way to get to Adamson in the jail," Sullivan said grimly. "Probably claim he was trying to escape." "We can't let that happen," Clara insisted. Sullivan raised an eyebrow. Clara, this isn't your fight." "It became my fight when Tucker threatened me for simply speaking to Kendrick," she replied fiercely. "And it certainly became my fight when they dragged him into town half dead for doing nothing more than his lawful duty." Sullivan studied her for a long moment. "You care for him," he said finally. "More than you're letting on." Clara didn't deny it. "Will you help me?" The saloon owner sighed heavily. "What did you have in mind?" Late that night, after the saloon had closed and the streets of Dillon had fallen silent, Clara made her way cautiously toward the small jailhouse. She wore a dark cloak over her dress, her hair hidden beneath a cap borrowed from Sullivan's young stable hand. In one pocket, she carried the key to the cell block that Sullivan had somehow procured. Clara hadn't asked how. And in the other, a small revolver. The jailhouse was dark except for a single lamp burning in the front office. Clara crept around to the back, finding the narrow window Sullivan had described. She tapped lightly on the glass. After a moment, Kendrick's face appeared, shadowed with bruises but alert. His eyes widened when he recognized her. "Clara," he whispered, "what are you doing here?" "Getting you out," she replied, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Can you walk?" "Barely," he admitted. "But I'll manage. How do you plan to open this cell?" Clara held up the key. "Sullivan has friends in unexpected places." Kendrick's expression grew serious. "Clara, if you do this, you can't stay in Dillon. Tucker will know you helped me." "I know," she said simply. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're coming with me." It wasn't a question, but Clara nodded anyway. "If you'll have me." A slow smile spread across Kendrick's battered face. "There's nothing I want more." His expression sobered. "But are you sure? It won't be an easy life." "I'm sure," Clara said firmly. "Now stand back from the door. The guard should be changing in a few minutes and we need to be ready." Clara made her way to the front of the jailhouse, hiding in the shadows as the night guard stepped outside to smoke. The moment he moved away from the door, she slipped inside, heart pounding. The office was empty, the keys to the cells hanging on a hook by the door to the cell block. Clara grabbed them. Even though she already had Sullivan's copy, it wouldn't do to leave evidence of outside help. She unlocked the door to the cells and hurried down the short corridor to where Kendrick waited, gripping the bars of his cell. "You're either the bravest or the most foolish woman I've ever met," he whispered as she unlocked his cell. "Perhaps a bit of both," Clara replied, helping him to his feet. He winced in pain but managed to stand. "Can you make it to the livery stable? Sullivan has horses waiting." Kendrick nodded grimly. "Lead the way." They made their escape through the back of the jailhouse, keeping to the shadows as they made their slow way toward the livery stable at the edge of town. Twice they had to hide as Tucker's men patrolled the streets, but finally they reached the stable where Sullivan waited with 2 saddled horses and a small bundle of supplies. "This is as far as I go," Sullivan said, helping Kendrick mount. There's food, water, and bandages in the saddlebags. And this. He handed Kendrick a folded piece of paper. Map to a cabin about 30 miles north. Belongs to a friend who won't ask questions. You can rest there for a few days before moving on. Clara embraced the saloon owner. Thank you, Bart, for everything. Sullivan patted her awkwardly on the back. You take care of yourself, Professor, and make this reprobate take care of you too. I will, Kendrick promised, extending his hand to Sullivan. I owe you a debt I can't repay. Just keep her safe, Sullivan replied, shaking his hand. That'll be payment enough. With a final farewell, Clara and Kendrick rode out of Dillon, taking a little-used trail that skirted the main road. The night was clear, stars blazing overhead in the vast Montana sky. Despite the danger and uncertainty that lay ahead, Clara felt a strange sense of freedom and rightness as they put distance between themselves and the town. They rode until dawn broke over the eastern mountains, finally stopping in a small clearing beside a creek to rest the horses and tend to Kendrick's wounds. He dismounted with difficulty, his face pale with pain and exhaustion. Let me see, Clara said, helping him remove his blood-stained shirt. She gasped at the extent of his injuries. Bruises covered his torso, and a deep gash ran along his right side, crudely bandaged with a torn piece of cloth. It looks worse than it is, Kendrick assured her, though his grimace betrayed him. Sit, Clara ordered, guiding him to a fallen log. She retrieved the medical supplies from the saddlebags and set about cleaning and properly bandaging his wounds. What happened at the line cabin? Kendrick winced as she cleaned the gash in his side. James was there, just as your information suggested. I managed to get the drop on him, but Tucker and his men arrived earlier than expected. There were too many of them. They took James somewhere else and decided to make an example of me. Did they? Is that when they did this to you? Clara asked, gesturing to his injuries. Kendrick's expression darkened. Tucker was quite thorough in expressing his displeasure. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she secured a clean bandage around his torso. I'm so sorry. Kendrick caught her hands in his. Don't be. If not for you, I'd be dead now. He searched her face. Clara, are you sure about this? About coming with me? It's not too late to go back. I could get word to Sullivan, I'm sure, she interrupted firmly. Dillon was never going to be my home. It was just a place I ended up when my plans fell apart. She met his gaze steadily. Besides, I think I've found someone worth following. Kendrick pulled her gently closer, mindful of his injuries. I don't deserve you, he murmured, but I'm selfish enough to keep you anyway. Their kiss was tender, a promise exchanged without words. When they parted, both were smiling despite the circumstances. We should move on, Kendrick said reluctantly. Tucker will have discovered my escape by now. They continued their journey through the day, keeping to the woods and valleys to avoid being spotted from the main trails. By nightfall, they reached the cabin. Sullivan had directed them to a small, sturdy structure nestled in a grove of pines with a view of the distant mountains. Inside, they found basic supplies: firewood, preserved food, clean water from a nearby spring, and a narrow bed. Clara built a fire while Kendrick secured the horses in the small lean-to attached to the cabin. We can rest here for a few days, Kendrick said, easing himself onto a rough-hewn chair by the fire. Give my ribs a chance to heal before we head for Helena. Helena? Clara asked, surprised. Isn't that dangerous? Tucker will expect you to report there. Exactly, Kendrick replied, which is why we need to get there as quickly as possible. The territorial marshal needs to know what happened, that Tucker is harboring his fugitive son and nearly killed a federal bounty hunter trying to execute a legal warrant. Clara considered this as she prepared a simple meal from their supplies. You think the marshal will believe you over Tucker? With your testimony as well, yes, Kendrick said. Tucker has influence, but he's not above the law, not territorial law. Once the marshal gets involved, even Tucker will have to back down. They ate in companionable silence, the events of the past 24 hours catching up with them. Clara found herself fighting to keep her eyes open. "Take the bed," Kendrick urged her. "I'll sleep by the fire." Clara shook her head stubbornly. "You're injured. You need proper rest." "The floor won't do my ribs any favors," he acknowledged, "but neither will arguing with you, I suspect." Clara felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "The bed is small but adequate for two," she said carefully. "If we're proper." Kendrick's eyes softened. "I would never presume, Clara." And so they shared the narrow bed, Kendrick's arm around Clara's waist, her back pressed against his chest. Despite her exhaustion, Clara found herself acutely aware of every breath he took, every slight movement. Eventually, lulled by the rhythm of his breathing and the safety of his embrace, she drifted into a dreamless sleep. They remained at the cabin for 3 days, allowing Kendrick's wounds to begin healing and giving the initial pursuit time to disperse. They spent the days in quiet conversation, learning about each other's pasts and cautiously discussing possible futures. By unspoken agreement, they maintained a respectful distance despite their growing feelings, both aware of the uncertain path ahead. On the 4th day, they set out for Helena, taking a circuitous route to avoid main roads and settlements where news of Kendrick's escape might have spread. The journey was slow and cautious, but uneventful. They camped beneath the stars, sharing stories and building dreams around small, carefully hidden fires. By the time they reached Helena, nearly 2 weeks had passed since their escape from Dillon. The territorial capital was a bustling city compared to the small settlements they had passed through, offering anonymity among its crowds of miners, businessmen, and government officials. They found lodging in a modest boarding house, taking separate rooms to maintain propriety. Kendrick went immediately to the marshal's office while Clara remained at the boarding house, anxious but hopeful. When Kendrick returned that evening, his expression was grim but determined. "The marshal knows Tucker," he explained as they sat in the boarding house's small parlor. "He's aware of his influence, but also his reputation for operating outside the law when it suits him." "Will he help us?" Clara asked. "He's sending a detail of deputies to Dillon to investigate and to look for James Tucker," Kendrick replied. "But he wants us to remain in Helena for now, where he can ensure our safety until the situation is resolved." Clara nodded, relieved. "So we wait, Kendrick agreed, reaching across the small table to take her hand. "But there's something else we need to discuss, Clara." Her heart quickened at his serious tone. "Yes. These past weeks, traveling with you, getting to know you. They've been the happiest of my life despite the circumstances," Kendrick said, his blue eyes intent on hers. "I know it's fast, and I know our situation is far from ideal, but I need to ask, what do you want after this is over?" Clara considered her answer carefully. "I came west looking for a new beginning, a place to build a life of my own. I never expected to find someone who would make me question all my careful plans." She squeezed his hand. "I don't know what the future holds, Kendrick, but I know I want you in it." His smile transformed his face, erasing the tension and worry of the past weeks. "Then maybe we should start thinking about making that future more certain." 2 months passed in Helena, a time of waiting but also of deepening connection. Kendrick found work as a deputy to the city marshal, his skills and experience valued despite the cloud hanging over him from the Dillon incident. Clara, drawing on her education, secured a position teaching at a small school for minors' children. News from Dillon arrived sporadically. Thomas Tucker had indeed filed charges against Kendrick for trespassing and attempted kidnapping, But these were countered by the territorial marshal's investigation into Tucker's harboring of his fugitive son. James Tucker remained at large, though rumors placed him in various locations throughout the territory. Despite the unresolved situation, Clara and Kendrick built a life together in Helena. They attended church services on Sundays, took walks along the gulch where miners still searched for gold, and slowly became part of the community. Clara's natural grace and education earned her respect among the town's leading families, while Kendrick's fair dealing and quiet competence gradually overcame the whispers about his past. On a crisp autumn evening, as golden leaves drifted down around them during their habitual walk, Kendrick stopped beneath a towering cottonwood tree. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a modest diamond. "I can't offer you wealth or even certainty, Clara, but I can promise to love you and protect you for all the days of my life. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Clara's eyes as she looked from the ring to the face of the man she had come to love so deeply. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Kendrick Adamson, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her close for a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. As they continued their walk, hand in hand, Clara marveled at the twisting path that had led her to this moment, from Boston society to a Montana saloon to the arms of a bounty hunter with eyes like mountain lakes. Their wedding was a simple affair, held in Helena's small church, with the territorial marshal serving as Kendrick's best man and the school headmistress standing up for Clara. They moved into a modest house on the edge of town, close enough for both to walk to their respective jobs, but with a view of the mountains that reminded them of their journey together. Just as they were settling into married life, news arrived that changed everything. James Tucker had been captured in Wyoming territory, trying to rob another bank. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was sentenced to hang. Thomas Tucker, broken by his son's capture and impending execution, suffered a stroke that left him bedridden and stripped of much of his power and influence. With the threat from Tucker effectively neutralized, Kendrick and Clara faced a decision: remain in Helena, where they had built the beginnings of a life, or return to Dillon to reclaim what had been taken from them. Sullivan wrote that he'd like to sell the saloon, Clara mentioned one evening as they sat before the fire in their small parlor. "He's getting older, and without Tucker's shadow looming over the town, business has improved to the point where the saloon would be a valuable property." Kendrick looked up from the book he was reading. "Are you suggesting we buy it?" Clara smiled, enjoying the surprise on his face. "I'm suggesting we consider it. Dillon is growing. The railroad is coming through next year. A well-run establishment could do very well. And you're teaching." Kendrick asked. "You love your work with the children." "Dillon needs teachers too," Clara pointed out. "Perhaps I could do both: teach during the day and help manage the saloon in the evenings. We could rename it, make it more respectable. A place for decent folks to gather, not just for drinking but for meals and perhaps even entertainment." Kendrick set his book aside, considering her words. "You've given this some thought." "I have," Clara admitted. "I never expected to feel a connection to Dillon, but it's where our story began. And with Tucker's influence waning, it could become the kind of community where we might want to raise a family someday." The mention of family brought a tender expression to Kendrick's face. They had spoken of children, both agreeing they wanted them but willing to wait until their situation was more settled. "If we did this," he said slowly, "I'd need to find work as well. I'm not sure Dillon is ready to hire the man who brought down Thomas Tucker as their lawman." "Perhaps not as sheriff," Clara agreed, "but your skills go beyond law enforcement. You know the territory, you're good with horses, and people respect your fairness. There would be opportunities. Over the next several weeks, they discussed the possibility from every angle. Letters went back and forth to Sullivan. Arrangements were made. And by the spring of 1876, Kendrick and Clara Adamson returned to Dillon as the new owners of what would become the Mountain View Hotel and Restaurant. The town had changed in their absence. With Tucker's grip loosened, new businesses had opened, and the population had grown. Some residents remembered the scandal of Kendrick's arrest and Clara's role in his escape, but most were willing to let bygones be bygones, especially when the Adamsons proved to be fair employers and valuable members of the community. Clara established a small school in a room adjacent to the hotel, teaching the children of Dillon during the day while overseeing the restaurant in the evenings. Kendrick, drawing on connections made during his years as a bounty hunter, established a freight business that transported goods between Dillon and the larger towns in the territory. They worked hard, saved carefully, and gradually expanded their enterprises. By the time the railroad arrived in 1877, the Mountain View was the most prosperous establishment in town, and the Adamsons were respected figures in the community. In the spring of 1878, nearly 3 years after their dramatic escape from Dillon, Clara gave birth to their first child, a son they named William Bartholomew Adamson, in honor of Kendrick's father and Bart Sullivan, who had remained a dear friend until his peaceful passing the previous winter. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family and community. Kendrick never returned to bounty hunting, finding satisfaction in building something lasting with Clara. They had their disagreements and challenges, as all couples do, but the bond forged in danger and sealed with love only strengthened with time. On a warm summer evening in 1880, as they sat on the porch of their home watching 5-year-old William chase fireflies in the yard with his 2-year-old sister Elizabeth, Clara turned to her husband. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Giving up the life you had for this?" Kendrick's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Not for a single moment," he replied. "Everything I've done, everywhere I've been, it was all leading me to you, to this life we've built together." Clara rested her head against his shoulder, thinking back to that night in Sullivan's saloon when a dust-covered bounty hunter had walked through the doors and changed her life forever. "Even the fire?" she asked with a smile. Kendrick laughed, remembering the events that had cemented their bond and altered their destinies. "Especially the fire." In the early hours of a summer morning 5 years earlier, Sullivan's saloon had caught fire, whether from a carelessly discarded cigar or deliberate arson by one of Tucker's men seeking revenge. They never knew for certain. Clara had been trapped upstairs, awakened by smoke and heat to find her path to the stairs blocked by flames. As she stood at the window, coughing and desperate, she had seen Kendrick running toward the building, heedless of the danger. He had broken through the batwing doors, disappearing into the smoke and flame. Minutes that felt like hours passed before he appeared on the stairs, fighting his way through the fire to reach her. "Hold on to me," he had said, wrapping his coat around her as he lifted her into his arms. "I've got you." And he had held her ever since, through danger and joy, hardship and prosperity. Two people from different worlds, brought together by chance and bound by a love that had proven stronger than fire, stronger than danger, stronger than all the forces that had tried to tear them apart. As the sun set over the mountains that had witnessed their journey, Clara Adamson offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the unexpected path that had led her home, not to a place, but to the arms of the man beside her.